Joining us now is the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan, Abdullah Hammoud. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you came to our attention recently. Let's put this up there on the screen, where you have canceled with a Biden campaign manager meeting over the unconditional support by the president for Israel. Given that you are the mayor of one of the most prominent Arab American towns, in the United States with a large population, we wanted you to join us and to tell us a little bit about your decision not to meet with the Biden campaign and some of the electoral politics that inform that.
From our perspective, we believe just that this is actually not a moment for electoral politics. If we want to talk about Palestinians and what's unfolding in Gaza, this is not an issue of campaigning and poll numbers. This is an issue that is before us through a lens of humanity. And so if we want to have a conversation about changing course for this White House administration, about how they move forward, I don't have that conversation with campaign staffers. I have that conversation with policymakers.
I see.
So you would be open, for example, to speaking with the president or his advisors directly. It was more the idea that they would reach out from a campaign and electoral perspective that you found, I don't know if you'd say offensive. How would you describe that?
This is day 113 or 114 now, and up until this point, there has not been a single member of the administration that's made it out to the city of Dearborn to have a conversation about what's happening. And so for us, it's extremely dehumanizing that the first time this actually occurs is when you send out your campaign manager. Yes, we would be open to have a conversation with any individual that wants to have a constructive dialogue about how to move things forward. But if you want to have a photo op, if you want to say that you listened or spoke to the Arab American community just to have that talking point, that's not a conversation that we're going to give in on or a conversation we want to be a part of.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, we've watched with some interest around the dynamics within this. As you said, you didn't want this to be part of electoral politics, almost certainly why they reached out to you. Some previous data, for example, we can put up here on the screen shows just how critical the Arab American vote was in the state of Michigan for 2020. What would you say then to President Biden? Electoral politics can be downstream then of policy. What would you say if you were to be able to meet with him about the concerns that you have amongst your constituents?
I think immediately I would say is we have set a very low bar as a community. We want to back a president that does not support a genocide. We want to back a president who believes in a value principle that I hope all Americans believe in. There's no justification for the killing of any innocent man, woman, or child. That is a very simple statement. And if you oppose that statement or disagree with that statement or try to add an asterisk to that statement or a qualifier, that says more about your moral compass than it says about anything else. And so that's what I would tell the president. We're here. We want to have meaningful dialogue. We want to immediately demand a ceasefire to end the onslaught and the killing of innocent men, women, and children. But we have to have a constructive pathway moving forward. The argument of the lesser of two evils, the idea that Trump will destroy American democracy, that is a question that needs to be put back into the hands and the laps of the current president. What will you do to avoid the American democracy from being threatened by a Trump reelection?
How are you navigating that question, and what are you hearing from your constituents? Because as you know, and you've probably been told directly, basically the Biden camp thinks they'll get over it. When they think about Trump on the other side, as their other choice on the ticket, who's called for a Muslim ban and would probably also be fully backing the genocide, they'll come to their senses in their view and they'll vote for Joe Biden once again. Now, what are you hearing from your constituents about how they're navigating that question? And how are you thinking about that question with your own moral compass?
We have residents who have had loved ones buried under the rubble in their residential towers after being bombed by Israeli fighter jets. We have had loved ones who have lost 12 plus family members. That is not something you ever forget about. Not now, and not in a matter of a few hundred days before an election season, something that you just move past. I've run for office 4 times now, previously as a state representative and now as mayor. And each time the question falls on the candidate. What will they do to earn the vote and the trust of the constituency that they're trying to represent? It's not a question you put back on the community of how dare you potentially allow somebody to threaten our democracy back into office. The candidate has to win over the residents of the country they're trying to serve. And really that question has to be put back to the president. People have tried to come to us and say this is strictly an Arab American issue or a Muslim American issue. And I also disagree with that notion. Over 80% of Democrats believe a ceasefire is the right pathway forward. Heck, the majority of Republicans believe that a ceasefire is the right path forward. And so I think it's time for the White House and for our congressional leaders to hear what Americans are asking for and to deliver on the promise of being decent human beings and bringing decency back to that White House.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Mayor. The undertone of a lot of what you're saying is that some people are not necessarily going to vote for Biden just because he tells them to say so. So we had a organizer for the ceasefire of New Hampshire here on the show, and we asked him explicitly, he said, okay, like, what is the goal of this? Is it just to send a message to President Biden, or is it to actually threaten, his ability to potentially get reelected? And he said solely it was just trying to get a message to President Biden who he remains and who he supports. So where do you stand kind of in that heuristic of looking at this issue?
Our primary elections are in about, less than 30 days. And we are, I am not at this point committed to voting for Joe Biden. Heck, I'm not committed to voting for President Joe Biden in November. I think what you're going to see is a majority of my community, majority of Dearbornites, sit this presidential election out. And more than just the presidential election, it's also the U.S. Senate. We don't have a front-running candidate who's also called for a ceasefire. And so I think what the Democrats risk is not only losing the White House, but also flipping the U.S. Senate back to the Republican stronghold. And so for us, that's what's at risk. And if you believe that being attached to Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing government is worth that sacrifice, then by all means move forward, and you'll see the consequences in November.
Mayor, what would you need to see from this president for him to earn your support?
It's hard to even come up with a list of things of what would it take to earn support. I think for me, it's what would it take for us to begin to have a dialogue along that pathway? And the immediate thing, again, is to call for the ceasefire. We can't continually read about nearly 200 people being murdered each and every single day that we wake up. For Dearborn, for us, this is very much real. Right? These are our parents' villages that are being bombed, our parents' villages that are being ethnically cleansed, our family members that are buried under the rubble. And so for us, we need decency. We need to be dignified and respected for the human beings that we are, and not only political calculations that are taking into account whenever elections come around.
Wow.
Finally, Mayor, we covered a moment ago Nancy Pelosi's comments basically saying that the ceasefire protesters are being funded by Russia, that this is Vladimir Putin's message. What is your response to that?
The Democratic leadership is in disarray. I cannot believe that in a moment in 2024 and 2023, the word ceasefire has become the most controversial term. That somehow Vladimir Putin is actually the one who wants to lead with diplomatic efforts. The idea that our Pope, who had renewed calls for a ceasefire, might potentially be a Russian operative. I think this is an opportunity for us to really have a conversation about what's happening with the Democratic Party, because we have to hold them accountable.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time, sir, and we appreciate what you had to say today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.